It is a defining moment for Africa, often described as the African century. The 21st century is witnessing the continent's growing importance in global affairs. Africa's role is gaining momentum as it consolidates a stronger strategic partnership with international actors and organizations. With its abundant natural resource, human resources, the continent stands poised to break free from decades of misrepresentation and to assert its influence in shaping political and economic agendas in an era of unprecedented global change. Hello viewers, this is Gaten Shangute, your program host. Today I'm joined by renowned Polish professor Andrzej Paulus, whose academic insights shed light on the evolving dynamics between Africa and the wider world, particularly Europe. Professor Paulus is a distinguished scholar at the Institute of International Studies, University of Rotterdam, where he leads the Department of Developmental and Regional Studies. His research focuses on the political economy of hydrocarbon management and the contemporary political developments in sub-Saharan Africa. He also explores paradoxes within the international relations theory. He is currently leading a major research project entitled European Union-EU Africa Relations Beyond the Rhetoric of the Partnership of Equals. Professor, thank you so much for this exclusive interview here.
Thank you for having me. It's really a privilege to give you this very interview.
Okay, Professor Paulus, before we delve into a discussion, let me pose a very general question. As a political commentator and a researcher, how do you perceive the current situation, especially the current dynamics in politics and economics in general, Professor?
Well, we live in an unpredictable times. There's a curse, if you want to curse somebody, to say, I wish you should live in interesting times, and we are having interesting times nowadays. Nobody predicted the war in the Ukraine. Central and Eastern European states were saying that this war might erupt at some moment. We have Donald Trump, who is using unpredictability as a political tactics in foreign relations. The destabilization of the Middle East, situation in Gaza, a lot of hot points. You probably hear what is going right now on the border in between Pakistan and Afghanistan. So the world is turning more towards the geopolitical word than the international relations-based word. I studied international relations. I lecture in the Institute of International Relations Studies, but I've got a feeling that when we speak IR, we more refer to the geopolitics nowadays, and there is a huge question ahead of us, because geopolitics is a concept when geography, also our external factors, are forcing the states to behave in a certain manners. There is a logic of geopolitics that is punishing for bad behaviors and is rewarding those who are acting according to this very logic. And it is a question for us whether we want to live in this very world.
Oh, that's great. So, considering your experience across the sphere, especially political science and international relations. So how do you see, the current global shift, especially for emerging regions like in Africa, and how this redefining the whole process? What's your reflection in this case, Professor?
I'm going to focus on sub-Saharan Africa because I think this division that exists in a discourse on the Maghreb region and sub-Saharan Africa is important. Obviously, the issue of the African unity is also crucial in here, which is embedded in African Union. But the regions, the sub-Saharan Africa can and should try to do whatever is possible to change its position in international division of labor. Because if you look into the hard data and the export structure of sub-Saharan African states, it is based on raw materials, it is based on agricultural products. Very few services are being sold overseas. Some of the economies are based upon services, but these are non-tradable services. Services that are being provided for the local communities, but they are not the source of the hard currencies that are needed by the African budgets. And the situation that we are living now in the multipolar world is not only Brussels or Europe or Washington. We've got Beijing, we've got United Arab Emirates, we've got Qatarians, we've got Turkey, we've got Russia, which is very specific in here in terms of its engagement into African affairs, mainly by supporting the military juntas in West Africa, in the Sahel region. But in this multipolar world, I think it is producing a chance for sub-Saharan states in order to improve their position in international division of labor. But a lot has to be done also by the local leaders, the leaders who will be able to define the core parts of the economies, accumulate the capital. This is ultra important for such a state like Ethiopia, to accumulate the capital when you look into the trade balances of the state, and invest it into industries that will add value to the already produced product. And I know that I'm repeating the mantra that exists in the academia for ages, that Africa is producing what is not consuming, and is consuming what is not producing. So it has to buy overseas the things that are important. Why Nigeria, that is producing a lot of oil, has to import petro products? Why Zambia is not producing the cables, is not producing semiconductors, while it's producing the copper? Botswana is a good example here of the country who pushed to the limits the value addition to the diamonds. At the very beginning, when the diamonds has been discovered in Botswana, Botswana was also selling raw diamonds on international markets. Right now, in Gaborone, we have diamond cutting center, we have diamond polishing center, and we have diamond trading center. So the whole value chain is in Botswana, and it would be a good role model, a beacon for the other African states to follow this very path. Obviously, you may say that diamonds are so specific. Nobody was as lucky as the Botswanians to have diamonds, a very specific and peculiar good under the ground. But as I said, a lot of sub-Saharan economies is based upon raw materials, and the action is supposed to be taken in order to add value here instead of selling crude overseas.
Yeah, that's right. That's an interesting point. So, given Africa, as you said, in abundant resources, natural resources, and the population, which is especially the population is very young, almost 65–70% of the population, is very dynamic. So, as you said, still there is a problem to materialize prosperity in the continent, especially to participating in global trade by adding value. So what's the potential in the future, especially for Africa, if the continent is going to seize this opportunity? What's the hope and optimism based on your view? You see Africa's issue, especially sub-Saharan African issue, you closely follow this continent surface.
It depends how you look on it, whether this glass is half full or half empty. The demography that you mentioned, you can define it as a great reservoir of labor and prosperous. It can be seen as a great field for the increase of investment into the human capital. On the other hand, you can see it as demographic bomb. In Ethiopia, every year, almost 2 million people are going into the job market, and you should provide the jobs for these people. You referred to the project, to my project that is dedicated to the EU-Africa relations. Migration is the major issue in terms of the EU-Africa relations nowadays. And nobody is born a migrant, right? Nobody naturally is willing to leave his or her place of settlement. So it's also telling you a lot how determined people must be to go into the shanty boats and trying to cross Mediterranean seas. And we know how many casualties it produced. On the one hand, sub-Saharan governments supposed to be wise and supposed to, I think the biggest tragedy for African states is the return to the past, when during the Cold War you have to say it directly, who are you supporting and who are you against? the sources of capital, the sources of foreign direct investments, the sources of know-how were either in Moscow or in Washington. And the two blocs were supporting political regimes in various sub-Saharan states. And I think that the African leaders are fully aware that they don't want to return to these positions, and they don't want to say clearly, I'm on the sides of Beijing, I'm on the sides of Washington, I support Europe. It is great to have multiple partnerships, and it is best to take the best what you can take from your counterparts. I think that the raw earth materials, which is a new mantra in international relations that are going to fuel the next technological revolution, are absolutely crucial in here, and Africa is perceived as a source of the rare earth materials. The question is, what will happen with these materials when they are being produced? Will the value will be added in here, or you will buy these materials again in your smartphones, computers, and the addition will be valid somewhere else. But as I said, you can look at that as a tremendous capital that you need to invest to, but you need to invest with a plan or something that can transform itself into a course.
Speaking on your project, as you said, European Union, EU-African relations beyond the rhetoric of the partnership of equals, which, the Africa, many of the relations we're talking about international relations, and there is some intent, there is some kind of view, just considering Africa as a subordinate rather than equally entertaining relationship between the two sides for mutual respect and mutual understanding and benefit. So what's the aim of your project, and what kind of assessment you are just finding in this case, Professor?
The project lasts for 2 years. It is designed for a 4-year project. We already did a discursive analysis of a huge data corpus of the official statements of the European Union commissioners, the debates that took place in European Parliament. All Europeans' voices when the issue of Africa or African states showed up, we analyzed it through MaxQDA software, and we are trying to trace the imbalances in relations. Who is setting the standards? Who is setting the agenda? Does the European Union feels that it knows better and its solutions supposed to be adopted by the African counterparts? Or maybe European Union is listening. The European Union is trying to accept and adopt suggestions that are coming from the continent. We also analyze the major trade agreements, starting from Lome Convention through Cotonou Convention and nowadays Samoa Agreement, if the language of the official legal acts is inclusive, exclusive, if there is patronage that we can trace. And the first finding is that in the 70s, the colonial spirit in European Union was very, very strong. Well, it is not a coincidence. The European Economic Community has been established in 1957, and at those days, Italy, Netherlands, France, they were colonial powers. So where they were designing European Economic Community, which is reflected also in the Treaty of Rome in a very colonial manner. But then you see the change of the narratives. Then you see that the EU is trying to be more inclusive, but you still have accusations of the African side that colonialism is still alive, that the EU is using norms, values, things that we call in academia epistemic violence, is setting the standards that African Union and African Union member states can hardly adopt, that it is prioritizing the issues that are not necessarily the most important issues for African states, that there are European values that are being imposed on African states. But my research, the field studies in sub-Saharan states, are somehow contradictory. None of my respondents, when I talk to the politicians, to the people who are introducing the EU-founded program, did not question such an issues as human rights or gender equality. LGBTQ+ is another section. This has been contested heavily. But they said, we support human rights. We support equality in between men and women. But what they technically mean about that, we want to open channels of communication between Africans and the Europeans, because sometimes we use the same words, but our understanding of these words is just different, depending on the context. So I think also there is a problem with European Union in terms of redefinition its strategy towards Africa. The EU must also find itself in the new circumstances. And African Union and African states also must rather find themselves in this new era that we are living in. Next month, the African Union European Union summit will take place in Angola. That will be the major summits in between two organizations. We must remember that the rise of China is a fact, but European Union is still the biggest donor and the biggest trading partner for African states. What will be decided during the summit? How the final declaration is going to look like? According to my best knowledge, a month before the summit, the final declaration is still not ready. What is it going to cover? Democracy, peace, transition, climate change, or it will focus on economic development, it is going to focus on industrialization, it is going to focus on prevention of capital outflows from this region of the world.
That's great. We are just conducting a very insightful discussion. Well, let me proceed to, build on your argument, and we have discussed earlier, special relationship and also the importance of restructuring some global institutional architectures. For instance, the African Union, the African nations themselves are just arguing, restructuring global institutions, including the United Nations Security Council. For instance, in recent times, the African Union is just demanding to be part of the United Nations Security Council because with 1.4 billion population, the Global Security Council, without this significant portion of population, maybe it does not give a desired result or desired peace and security around the world. So, as an expert, as a politician, and what's your advice in this case, and how the international community consider this Africa's demand in general?
The question of African agency is crucial in African studies. Mm-hmm. African states that became independent, obviously Ethiopia was independent long before the decolonization processes, but around the year 1960, that's the year of Africa, when 18 states became decolonized, they had to adopt the rules and conditions of international system that they were unable to create. The states were inborn into international system, and the United Nations Security Council reflect the situation of 1945 when the council has been created, and demands of Africans, like the highest number of cases in front of the Security Council, these are actually the sub-Saharan African cases, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that the proposal by the US that 2 permanent seats will be granted for Africa, but without a veto power, is humiliating. Obviously, they're supposed to be a member from Africa in the Security Council with a veto power. African Union recently became the member of G20. That's something what's supposed to be emphasized. During the enlargement of BRICS, we have with Ethiopia new countries that joined this very platform. And I think multilateralism works relatively good for African states. In terms of what I said a few minutes ago, in terms of balancing interests and in terms of having as many partnerships as possible and not bidding on one horse. But as I said, international system reflects the power in international systems that existed after the end of the World War II. The world has changed, and the institutions shall reflect this change. The point is that you've got the treaty basis of any international institutions, and you have to redefine the treaty, renegotiate the treaty in order to change, for example, permanent membership in UN Security Council. But Africa is also involved in multiple forms of bilateral cooperations. We've got FOCAC with China. We had two summits in between US and Africa. And as I said, next month we are going to have African Union, European Union summit. So there is a lot of going on in terms of diplomatic activity. The point is whether Europe is making work to adjust itself to these new conditions, and whether African Union and Africans are doing the same job, because it's the issue of fairness. To tell what we want from each other, what are the lowest common denominators that can allow us to cooperate effectively, and we should lay a solid foundations for the future. On the one hand, Africa cannot blame everything on colonial past. There is a lot that the colonial past is going to be blamed to, but you cannot utilize this argument for 65 years. On the other hand, European Union must admit that its development, accumulation of capital, was due to the exploitation of the people who are living in global majority.
According to your argument, especially the African Union in recent time is, Africa as a continent also, beyond the continental organ, AU, African Union, trying to create different platforms in the multilateral relationship with, for instance, you mentioned with China, FOCAC, US-Africa business, and AU.
Russia.
Russia also. So how do you evaluate this involvement? This involvement and also the continent's visibility in this case in recent time. What do you think in this case?
Well, definitely you see more news, more issues being raised, and more presence of Africa on international stage, in international environment. That's without the question that the coverage of Africa is appearing. I can speak from the experience of Poland. The number of newses dedicated to African issues in Polish media is on the rise, and Poland has never ever been a colonial power. Actually, one can argue that we were colonized during the period of partitions by Prussia, Austria, and Russia, and they were under the Soviet occupation after World War II, which gives us a special link to Africans, that we know the experience of being under the rule of foreign powers. The question is whether Africa is going to utilize this very moment for its own benefits, whether it's going to negotiate good deals. And I'm always fed up when I speak Africa as a whole. We have 53, 54, depending how you count, member states of the 54 of the African Union. And Europeans also tend to think about Africa as a bloc. And there were demands that, for example, after the invasion on Ukraine, that I strongly condemned, we wanted all African states to vote during the UN General Assembly as we want them to vote. And what is striking for me, more than 10 African states, Ethiopia included, left the voting room. They did not vote in favor, they did not vote against, they did not abstain. They just said, we are not going to take part and take sides in this voting. So there is just a new form of protesting against forcing you to support one side or the other. You don't have to abstain from the vote. You can leave the voting room. And I think that Europe shall see that Africa shouldn't be thought or defined as a big country somewhere in the south, that there are tremendous differences in between like what Djibouti has in common with Botswana, right? But they are both on the continents, and one size fits all policy might not be as beneficial as the policy based on bilateral approaches to the certain states. Peace and stability might be slightly more important than democracy, than the climate change. And what will be the priority of mutual relations in between EU and AU, well, we'll see in a month after the meeting in Angola.
That's great. Well, maybe this is a final question, final discussion for the issue of Africa-EU relation especially. And I want to ask you, about, for instance, the European Union before its establishment in the 1940s, the Second World War. After that, they came together and established, by far, the European Union, the strongest bloc in the continent, maybe globally. And the African Union, after many countries got their independence from colonial powers, and they established the African Union here in Addis Ababa. The headquarters is here. And it is important to create a more strong bloc and a more strong continental organ. So what's your advice, based on you came from Europe and also witness and conduct tremendous researches in this case? What's your advice for African nations, especially just make bold and strong the African Union?
We should supposed to remember that the ideational basis of European Economic Community, the predecessor of European Union, and Organization of African Unity, which is the predecessors of African Unions, are absolutely different. European Union or Europe experienced World War II, experienced the genocides, experienced tremendous losses in terms of human capital, and we wanted to prevent the war. It was anti-nationalistics. France and Germany wanted to combine their industries in order, coal and steel, in order to prevent one nation to go for the war for another time. While in terms of the African integrations, there were also different ideas on how the pan-continental organizations should look like. Today's Kwame Nkrumah dream of having a free trade area on the continent is being materialized. I would advise Africans to invest more in African continental free trade area. It is not going to solve all the problems, but on the other hand, the industries and the economies of sub-Saharan states are quite the same, but it is definitely will help. That would be my first advice. Invest and create free trade area in here. Think about capital accumulation in your states. Define the idea of the developmental state. Define the core industries that you want to develop. Don't think about sustainable development. Sustainable development is a myth that you have to simultaneously develop everything. Invest in one or two areas, like Ethiopia did with Ethiopian Airlines, right? Vast of the services, as I said, is being consumed locally, but there is one service that you can sell overseas, and it is very successful. I wish to have more Ethiopian Airlines-like services provided by various sub-Saharan states.
Professor Paulus, thank you so much for this very insightful discussion and interview. I really appreciate it.
The pleasure is mine.